Hello, hello.
Good afternoon. Could we please ask the panelists to come forward to the front and don't stop eating or drinking. Feel free to replenish cups and plates. This will be a welcoming, relaxed panel, so feel free. But if you can take your seats, we'll be starting in just a minute or two. So good afternoon to everybody. You're most welcome to this event, which is being partnered by UNICEF, IIED, the Government of Finland, and EVALSDGs. My name is Dorothy Lux. I'm the co-chair of EVALSDGs. We welcome you all who are in the room. We also welcome those of you who are online and aren't with us physically, but are watching the proceedings here. We are very much delighted to have with us Ms. Charlotte Petri-Gornicka, who is the Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, Assistant Secretary General, to welcome us today. Charlotte has a very high profile in development. She was the chair of Development Assistance Committee of the OECD, and she has more than 20 years of experience in international development, and we are delighted that she is with us today to help us launch this event. Charlotte, please come forward.
Thank you very much. You're filming, so you need me to use the mic, I guess. Yes. Let me start by echoing the welcome to you and to this event. I'm very pleased and privileged to do so. Evaluation to connect the SDGs with national priorities. Learning from Finland and Nigeria. That's a very good start. We who do evaluation, we want to use them, we want to learn from what we do. Jointly organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, EVALSDGs, IIED, and UNICEF. And you know that this event is happening in connection with the HLPF, the event in which governments bring their voluntary reporting to the stage, and they bring hard facts. I want to share with you just a little bit personal before I go back to the script. When I listen, it's always embarrassing to listen to, well, she's got 20 years of this and that, but I realize evaluation has been a red thread throughout the development career, if you will, that I have been so pleased to have. But it has not always been easy to be evaluated or to make sure to put in place the right evaluations when you're a decision maker, to make sure that we are relevant in what we do to the people who needs to take decision based on what we do, but also to fight for evaluation, because my impression is that many of the decision makers, I headed up a governmental agency, SIDA, and together with many of my colleagues in roles like that, we had to support governments with the narrative that they need when they anchor development assistance in their society. And they are asking for not only facts, but stories. When they get stories, they are asking for facts. When they are asked, what has happened? You've been there for 25 years. Tell us, has anything changed? They have not been able to respond sometimes. Because the tool, evaluation, is not necessarily, in my experience, positioned as it should be in the context of decision making and learning. I hope that you will discuss these things, and if I can be of any help, I will be. Because now I'm UNICEF and we are evaluated, I can tell you. But I remember what it was like to be a government. So, in this high-level forum, as you are aware, countries are presenting their voluntary report on the progress toward SDGs. And while these reports contain hard data, they fail to explain the reasons behind the numbers. What changes are happening in countries in terms of reducing inequalities? What changes are happening when it comes to achieving higher quality education and health levels, among other examples. What do we know about what's behind the numbers? Who are benefiting from these changes? These are questions that cannot be responded to just by hard data. Evaluation is the function that can help respond. Therefore, the importance of evaluation is undeniable. This event is also happening at a time when we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, CRC. And for UNICEF and for many child-focused organizations, it's also a very special moment to discuss how evaluation can help analyze to what extent countries are aligned with the CRC and what has changed because of the CRC, and what can change and be evaluated when the CRC, which is a universal agenda, as well as the SDGs, which are universal, how will the two agendas become mutually reinforcing, and can we see that? UNICEF will take stock on what has happened 30 years after the convention was born, and use that as a point of departure to discuss what more has to be done. So we do things based on evaluations. This side event is aimed at raising awareness on how evaluation can play a role in the country-level discussions around the Agenda 2030. How can evaluation inform progress on SDG achievement, and how evaluation can also contribute to more inclusive processes to implement the Agenda 2030. And more specifically, this panel will, in this panel, the importance of dynamic and inclusive country-led evaluations will not only be highlighted, but illustrated through two concrete cases from Finland and Nigeria. And these countries have been the very first to undertake an evaluation of the SDGs, just 4 years after, which is so good, because sometimes we wait too long. We hope that we will learn from your experience. We know we will. And based on this experience, support other countries to move in the same direction. I also see this event as an opportunity to raise the importance of doing evaluations at the national and at other level with, of course, child rights perspectives. I'm sure you will agree that to incorporate a child rights perspective into evaluation is in line with the principles of leaving no one behind, underpinning the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. And with no further ado, I wish you, all of us, a very fruitful debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And thank you for explaining the purpose of our session so clearly. You'll see on the presentation that was rolling earlier, Article 74 of the 2030 Agenda, which I think so many of us are familiar with in terms of it exhorting the follow-up and review process through the voluntary national reviews. But there are so many other clauses under that article which are really important. We understand that the VNRs are for identifying the challenges and the gaps and the critical success factors in terms of the 2030 Agenda and the implementation of the SDGs. But some of the other clauses which we want to draw your attention to through this panel are that it's designed to support countries in making informed policy choices and to work in implementation and partnerships together on those critical success factors. It calls for country-led evaluations. So what you're going to hear today is the first two steps in that actually coming into fruition and moving forward. But it doesn't even stop there. There's also a clause that talks about evaluation programs. And I think this is something that you will also hear, is that these are not just one-off evaluations. These are embedded into the national processes and are becoming evaluation programs. So we hope that you will learn from the experience of Finland and Nigeria, but also consider how that can be played out in your own countries or in your own organizations. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist today, who is Mr. Sami Pyrkälä, who works as a councillor on sustainable development at the Prime Minister's office in Finland. Sami has been a key leader in the evaluation and has a lot of experience to bring into this process. At the moment, his key areas of responsibility in Finland are the implementation of the 2030 Agenda in Finland and in the EU. Currently, Finland holds the presidency of the Council of the European Union, so Sami acts as the chair of the EU Council Working Party on the 2030 Agenda. He's worked in many different positions over the last 15 years and holds a master's degree in social science from the University of Turku. Sami, over to you.
Thank you, Dorothy, and thanks first of all to EVALSDGs, UNICEF and IIED for organizing this great event. Evaluation is a dear topic for Finland. It means knowledge-based, evidence-based decision-making, and good decisions, long-lasting decisions, as we know, are based on evidence. So I, as Dorothy said, I work in the Prime Minister's office in Finland, and I'm responsible for implementation of Agenda 2030 in Finland, and I was also responsible for carrying out the evaluation I'm now presenting to you. I will give you a policy planner perspective to evaluation here. I think it's important to mention it because there are different perspectives to doing evaluations. So mine is policy planner's perspective. And I will tell you shortly about 4 things. First, I will start with how the decision on evaluation was made in Finland. What were the key elements on that, and then how the evaluation itself was done and what were the key results of our evaluation. Then I will tell you about the learnings, what we learned from the evaluation, and this again from the policy planner's perspective, what were the success factors and what may be, if you are planning to make an evaluation, what should you take into account or maybe do differently as what we did. And then I will finish with showing you just one slide about the Finnish new government program, of which I'm very proud of from the sustainability perspective. But before I really start, I would like to know how many of you here present are policy planners or government officials? Could you just raise your hand? Okay, few of policy planners. And then what about evaluators or researchers? So more researchers than policy planners, but maybe you can bring this message to back home to your policy planners as well. I think it would be important to get policy planners to hear these messages as well. Okay, let's see if I can use this one. Yes, so decision to make an evaluation in Finland was made already in 2017, in the beginning of 2017, when we made a national implementation plan for the 2030 Agenda. As you all know, the Transforming Our World, the document, it has one chapter about evaluation and monitoring and so forth, and there is also a text that countries should evaluate their national sustainability policies. And we wanted to take that message and put it into our plans as well. So in our the report the government gave to the Parliament, in the report it said that we will make a comprehensive and independent evaluation on our national sustainable development policy in 2019, and every 4 years from that on. I will come back to that a bit later, but before that, I would like to tell you why it was in 2019 we decided to do it. In Finland, we had parliamentary elections in 2019 in April. So, and there's a 4-year cycle in our parliamentary elections. So our plan was to get the results of the evaluation few months before the parliamentary elections, so that the results and findings of the evaluation recommendations could feed into the discussions, pre-election discussions in Finland. And also they would give evidence and guidance to the new government when they are preparing the government program in Finland and asking us what to do as comes to sustainable development. Then we could say that, well, this is what you should do, and it's not our opinion, it's based on the evaluation results. That's what we wanted to do. But also we have made a decision to present a VNR, our second VNR, to HLPF in 2020. So we felt already in 2017 that it would be good to have evidence-based starting point to our VNR as well. And now we have the results of the evaluation, and we can build our evaluation, our VNR on the evaluation results. Just shortly about how the evaluation was carried out in practice. So here you see in the left corner, you see that parliamentary elections were in April 2019, and that was like a deadline for us in our evaluation plans. So we started in late 2017 by preparing the terms of reference for the evaluation and discussing about the evaluation questions and selecting the evaluation team. And at the same time, we created a support group for Prime Minister's office in this work, because it was myself, and I'm not an evaluation expert, so I felt I need some support, and that's why we made this kind of group. And we also had discussions with the EVALSDGs at that point, and got some good advice from EVALSDGs on how to do it. Then, as we had selected the evaluation team started the preparation of evaluation, internal preparations in the evaluation team. And we set up a steering group for the evaluation. And then at that time, I also set up a support group for evaluation team during the evaluation. It was partly the same team, same people that were supporting me in the preparation, but then there were some other people as well included in that group. And also there were 2 sessions with EVALSDGs and IIED and international evaluation community with the evaluation team. So we wanted to also bring the international perspective and international expertise on SDG evaluation to the use of our evaluation team. Then the time for making the evaluation itself, that was actually quite short, a bit too short in my view, but that's how it went this time. It was only half a year they had time for preparing the evaluation and preparing the report. And then one important step in the work was also the dissemination of findings and recommendations, and we discussed about that early on already, and we made it clear that it's not only the task of the evaluation team, it's the task of Prime Minister's office, it's the task of a steering group, and it's the task of this support group. And actually even this event we are having here right now is part of our dissemination. So it's just not to make the evaluation, but think about the dissemination as well. Key findings or recommendations from the evaluation team. There were 10 key recommendations, and in the table back there you can find this policy brief which presents those recommendations, and there's also a link to a full version of the evaluation in English. So this kind of it looks like this, the policy brief. And I'm not presenting all those 10 recommendations, but just shortly a few of them. First of all, one of the key recommendations was that the future governments should adopt the 2030 agenda as a base for government policy. The evaluation team considered that if it is just a separate sustainable development policy, and then there is a government policy, government program somewhere else, then what might happen is that the government program actually guides the work of the government, and this sustainable development strategy is just in a way sidelined. So it should be integrated into the government program. Secondly, in Finland, the previous government took 2 priority areas for National Agenda 20 implementation. The first one was carbon neutral Finland and resource-wise Finland, and the other one was about non-discrimination, equality, and high competencies. So the evaluation team considered that these 2 focus areas for national implementation, they were well placed, and Finland should continue the work based on these priority areas. Then one interesting recommendation from the evaluation team was that we should carry out a national roadmap for Agenda 2030, meaning a plan which would extend over government periods and show what is actually the path, the concrete path to Finland, so that we complete all the SDGs, all the targets by 2030. This does not exist in Finland right now, but the evaluation team said that this would be important to have. More public funds, sustainable development, and in a more coherent way. And coherence is important here. We have developed sustainable development budgeting in Finland. It's on its way, and the current government is continuing it. But it's not only about budgeting, it's also about public procurement, how we do public procurement and how we design that, and being more coherent in that. And last of the points I present here was about scientific support and monitoring for the 2030 agenda. So the evaluation team, even though we have our national indicators and monitoring systems, the evaluation team felt that this should be further developed. Just key lessons learned from our evaluation from policy planners' perspective. First, my key advice would be that the commitment to evaluation should be somehow included in the key political documents of the government, because it is sometimes the case that if you propose something to your ministers, then you might not have the money for that right at that moment. But if you propose that something should be done after 2 years from now, in the future, that might be an easier decision for the decision makers to make. And then when you have this commitment into doing something in the future, then they also need to find the money at that time. So that would be my first advice or lesson learned. Second, design a participatory process for the preparation and implementation of the evaluation. So in our case, for me, it was very helpful to have this support group in the preparation of the evaluation, and then for the evaluation team during the evaluation. And I think that was important also from the perspective of engaging a wider society into this evaluation work. And then the evaluation team also had some public hearings and made the evaluation in a participatory manner, and that's the other part of that. But all in all, it's important to think about the participatory aspect, and that it's especially important when you think about the 2030 agenda and the the core idea of the 2030 agenda, that it's not just for governments to implement. We need the society as a whole into the implementation. Lastly, and this is, I think, the most important thing, you should focus on impact. And in our case, I would say that timing was one of the key success factors. To think about the political cycle in the country and integrate it in the right way into that political cycle, so that when you get the evaluation results, those results are interesting to policymakers and they come in the right time. In our case, they came 2 months before the election, but now, as I think of it, they could have came half a year before the election, or even a bit earlier, because that's when the political parties are making their electoral programs. And actually, if you really want to be effective, you should have these ideas in the electoral programs of political parties. So half a year or even a bit more. And then create ownership among political decision makers and civil society. If you want the results to be used, I think it's important that the policymakers feel ownership to the evaluation. It's not an evaluation that is done by someone else, somewhere else, but it's an evaluation they have wanted to do. It's an evaluation that they have commissioned, and they feel that, for example, in our case, there were a lot of discussion with parliamentarians during the evaluation. And I think that was very useful, because then the parliamentarians were also interested about the results of the evaluation. And lastly, make a dissemination plan at an early stage. So it doesn't end when the evaluation results come out. You have to think about how to tell about the results in different places and to different audiences. My last slide is about the government program of Finland. I'm not going to read all these citations, but these are actually from the government program itself. And in the first page, it says that our aim is to transform Finland into a socially, economically, and ecologically sustainable society by 2030. And we also have an ambitious climate goal, so that Finland should be carbon neutral by 2035. So it's a very ambitious government program, and I hope that the evaluation somehow supported the policymakers in preparing this government program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sami. And we'll ask, I'm sure you have many questions, as we have benefited from Finland's experience. But if you can hold your questions for the moment, this is a learning event. And so what we'd like you to do is actually think about your questions as now we ask our next panelists, and say, well, what do we learn from a country which has really thought this through and has completed the first cycle, if you like, of the process, to Nigeria, where there is very active process at the moment in terms of the evaluation for the Sustainable Development Goals. And to help us in that, we have Dr. Bala Yusuf Yunusa, and he is the Senior Technical Advisor to the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President in Nigeria. So he is working very closely with the leadership on their approach to the SDGs and how evaluation can play a role in that. Dr. Bala has a BSc in Economics and a PhD in Development, Economic and Policy from the University of Manchester. And he's the former team leader of the Millennium Villages project, supported by the UN in Nigeria, where he was overseeing the project. Dr. Bala, please join us.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I bring warm greetings from the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm here with my colleagues, Yahaya Hamza, who is the Head of Sectors, and Smart Akande, who is the Legal Advisor. And obviously, we have Mr. Haigbe, who is here with us at the High Commission. So together, we will be taking this presentation to basically share Nigeria's experience in the overall implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs. And the thesis we will want to advance is that evaluation is more of a political than a technocratic endeavor. And therefore, we need to provide some sort of background into the commitment that has gone into the implementation of the 2030 Agenda itself, and obviously, specifically the evaluation of the SDGs that we have just commenced the process this January in Nigeria. So basically, following the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, Nigeria acted very quickly in the overall implementation of the 2030 Agenda. And that led to the establishment in January 2016 of the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Sustainable Development Goals right at the presidency with fourfold mandate, clear mandates. That of providing strategic coordination and guidance for the SDGs, that of resource mobilization and management, that of advocacy, representation, and partnership building, and crucially, that of monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. And our approaches can be seen at two different levels. We appreciate the fact that we run a federal system with 36 states, 774 local governments, and approximately 193 million people based on the National Bureau of Statistics. So we recognize the fact that the coordination cannot be a national level affair. We have to go to the subnational level. And obviously the fiscal decentralization devolved autonomy to the states and the local governments. Approximately 50% of the resources go to that level. And therefore we have to come up with strategy to operate at both national and at the subnational level. So at the national level, what do we do as a coordinating office? We work with the federal ministries, departments, and agencies to ensure they integrate the SDGs into their sectoral policies and plans. And obviously that you could see when we talk about specifically the evaluation, how it became so easier for us to prioritize these sectoral plans and also take stock in terms of evaluating them. So few issues on the implementation progress. Once we commenced the implementation, we had to draft a country transition plan from the Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals, trying to know the context within which we will operate. And to do that, we did, in partnership with the UNDP, National Bureau of Statistics, come up with the SDG baseline indicator reports, which is that one you can see. And what we did basically is to take stock of what the indicators across the ministries, departments, and agencies. And we identified gaps that needs to be filled in terms of the sort of data that fits into the requirements of the SDGs. And we identified that, and at the moment, we are working with the National Bureau of Statistics to completely realign the national statistical system with the requirements and indicators of the SDGs. I think that exercise should be completed by the end of this month. So just as we commenced the implementation of the SDGs in January 2016, Nigeria found itself in an economic recession in 2016, June, July to be precise. And we needed to craft a medium-term economic development plan that would take us out of that economic recession. And to do that, we seized that moment and that opportunity as a country to integrate the social, economic, and environmental dimension of the SDGs into the economic recovery and growth plan. So the economic recovery and growth plan has 2017 to 2020, has three cardinal objectives. That of restoring economic growth, 1. 2, that of investing in people, and 3, that of building a globally competitive economy. So we made sure that within those three cardinal objectives, we've integrated, if you like, mainstream, the three dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals, the economic, social, and environment, into that plan. So at the national level, we have that integration. Then the voluntary national review. In 2017, Nigeria was among the few countries that have voluntarily submitted its voluntary national review to the high-level political forum in July 2017. And it highlights the key institutional frameworks and mechanisms, like I've earlier provided the background, put in place to ensure that Nigeria is on track towards the implementation of the 2030 agenda. But now, why prioritization and evaluation? We appreciate the fact that we need, going forward, to make our national voluntary reviews evidence-based. So we need to support that with evidence that is empirical, and therefore the need for an independent evaluation of the SDGs in Nigeria. I still put forward that thesis that it is really more political than a technocratic endeavor, because we need the political leaders to agree to do an evaluation, because we know how difficult it is to convince the political leaders to undertake an evaluation of a program of this magnitude. So in Nigeria, we first of all participated at the Pan-African Regional Capacity Building Workshop, generously organized by UNICEF in Ethiopia. So Nigeria participated. Immediately after that, we came back to Nigeria, met with the political leaders in the person of the Senior Special Assistant to the President to convince her to commence the process of evaluating the priority SDGs so that we can strengthen our evidence for the MVR. That led to the establishment of a technical working group on SDG evaluation in Nigeria, with representatives from the Office of the President on SDGs, National Ministry of Budget and National Planning, and other key sectors. So we quickly organized a capacity building workshop for SDG evaluation in country. So we were in Lagos for 1 week with all the monitoring and evaluation officers from the key federal ministries, departments, and agencies. Ada was there from New York and supported the conduct of that exercise. And during that exercise, we looked at the National Development Plan in the ERGP. And we looked at the 3 objectives of the ERGP. And we said, among these 17 SDGs, which ones directly speaks to the intent of that our National Development Plan, which is the ERGP. And we collectively agreed that SDG 1, 3, 4, 5, and 8 speaks directly to the 3 cardinal objectives of the ERGP that I provided the background earlier. So we agreed to conduct a prioritization. So if we were to take the first 3, which ones would that be? And we came up with this. So this was the capacity building workshop. We needed to prioritize 3 out of the 5 that we have identified as the priority SDGs, so that we could develop terms of reference that could go out for solicitation of the independent evaluation. And what we used this simple criteria mapping, beginning A to K, trying to look at which of these SDG has a sectoral plan that is linked to that particular SDG we're looking at. The sort of government flagship programs that contributes to that SDG. So let me not take too much of your time on this, but these are the criteria we use to narrow down to the 3 top priority SDGs. And this is the ranking. About 48 participants attended, and therefore we arrived at SDG 3, being the first, SDG 4, and SDG 1 in that order. So we prioritized these 3 SDGs, developed a draft TOR during the workshop in Lagos, and then had a follow-up workshop to refine that TOR so that we can go out for solicitation. I think as we speak now, UNICEF has graciously agreed to advertise for the solicitation. I think today is the closing for the one of education, and I think the health, few more days to go. So that's the stage at which we are in the entire process that we commenced only this January. And we hope that by February 2020, we will have the final results of all the 3 evaluations, hopefully, and then we use the evidence to strengthen our 2020 voluntary national review for Nigeria. But there are key features that I just want to highlight what we're looking at with these terms of reference. If you look at the purpose, we're looking at learning, accountability, evidence-based voluntary review reporting. You look at the overall evaluation criteria and questions, we are looking at OECD DAC criteria of relevance, impact, effectiveness, efficiency, as well as sustainability. We're also looking at the SDG principles of obviously the human rights, leave no one behind, gender equality, equity, and universality. And the sort of instruments that we identify to be the instruments of evaluation for SDG 1, we have a massive national social investment program, I think the largest in sub-Saharan Africa, and obviously the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, 2017 to 2020. For the education health goal, we have the Nigeria Strategic Health Development Plan, and for SDG 4, we have the Nigeria Education Sector Strategic Plan. And our methodological approach is the theory-based as well as mixed method using both qualitative and quantitative approaches. The next steps, obviously I've mentioned that, the conduct of the 3 evaluations, the inauguration of the ministerial level steering committee that will provide leadership and the political backing to, for the findings and uptake of the findings of the evaluation, and obviously strengthening our submission. In conclusion, I would like to argue that the federal government of Nigeria has shown strong commitment in the overall implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Institutional frameworks have been established at the national and at the subnational level. We are now working with the states and local government to ensure that they integrate the SDGs into their sectoral policies and medium-term plans at the subnational level. We also know that it is evident that we need evidence-based evaluation to show progress on why and how, and what is working and what is not working and why. And we also emphasize the fact that we need the political commitment to undertake an SDG evaluation anywhere in the world. We also appreciate the fact that to leave no one behind, we need the expertise and financial resources of all, the civil society, the private sector, the organized private sector itself, the wider community, as well as the civil society in support of the 2030 agenda that leaves no one behind. So I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bala. Very clear. So we're going to open the floor for a few moments for about 3 or 4 questions, and then we will introduce our discussants. And we have a question, Asela. Oh, thanks, Geeta. Plenty of questions. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Please identify yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Alex Tete, MP of Ghana Parliament. My first question goes to the first presentation. I want to find out if you have an independent evaluation council or you have it in the office of the Prime Minister. If it is in the office of the Prime Minister, how independent is the report in terms of reporting? Then 2, to the last presentation, that's Nigeria. In all your presentation, you mentioned civil societies and all that, but there is a mix. I don't know if your legislators are involved in this process, because you have not mentioned any legislator or any MP in this particular evaluation process. I want to find out if they are part of this particular process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I am Martin Sonke from Cameroon. My organization is Africa Development Interchange Network, and we are a member of the African Working Group on Sustainable Development. I really thank you very much for the presentations. And referring to the first one, and following the steps of my brother from Ghana, we heard that you do evaluation looking at other stakeholders. What I would like to know is, how do you bring in the grassroots? And is there a formal mechanism for that? Or is it just those that you mentioned? Because I remember you mentioned just a few. You mentioned parliamentarians, but I did not hear other stakeholders. Is there any formal mechanism to bring the grassroots on board? Thank you.
Many thanks. Andrew Norton here from IIED. My question is also for Sami on Finland. I was fascinated to hear about the integration with the political cycle and producing results in the run-up to an election. I would think there's a rather clear and obvious risk there that the results, either if very negative or very positive, could become a political football in the run-up to an election. Was that a risk you were aware of, and did you do anything to mitigate that risk in the way you presented the information?
Thank you. And then Florencia.
Hi, thank you very much, Dorothy and the panelists, for very great presentations. I'm Florencia from UN Women Evaluation Office, also Eval Gender and Eval Partner. So my question is for Sami, and I'm actually looking at the TOR from the Nigeria evaluation, where you have incorporated the principles of not leaving no one behind and gender equality. So I would like to know more, Sami, if your evaluation has addressed these principles as well, and how have you integrated the gender equality and equity-focused approach of the evaluation, and if anything has come out relating to, what are the underlying causes of gender inequalities in Finland. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We'll pause there for a moment and ask Sami and Dr. Bala to provide feedback to those answers. First to you, Sami.
Thank you. First to the question of Ghanaian parliamentarian. Yes, in Finland we don't have independent evaluation council. There's a lot of evaluations made in Finland, but these are sectoral evaluations, and in many ministries they have their own evaluation offices and so forth. So that's how it's organized. But now there is discussion in Finland on whether we should create some structures for evaluation to move a step to the direction of having an independent evaluation council or some kind of an office who would be coordinating evaluations. And because we noticed that this is a difficult issue for us, and it's difficult to have many evaluations, and the evaluators don't always know about the other evaluations made in other places. And there's also, as you said, the question of independence of the evaluations. So I feel that this is an issue which maybe, I'm not an evaluator, so the evaluators may correct me here, but I feel that this might be an issue where developing countries are better structured than developed countries like Finland, where actually the final evaluation of policies of the government are made in the next election, and the logic behind the work is that the electorate evaluates in the end the work of the government. But we should move into the direction you mentioned and strengthen the independent part of the evaluation. And then to Cameroon, how to bring grassroots level aboard. In our evaluation, the evaluation team had some events where they invited CSOs, and of course you can always ask whether CSOs represent the grassroots level. That's another question. But they tried to make these kind of events where they take aboard the level of ordinary citizens in this evaluation. So that's what we do, and in our sustainable development policies we have some mechanisms which try to bring in the grassroots level. But it's an issue where more should be done as well. Andrew asked about the risk of results being somehow maybe a burden to government or somehow difficult for the election, or maybe if you. Okay. Yes. Yes. We were aware of this risk, and but sort of thought that that's the risk there is, and if you want to make evidence-based policy, you also have to accept that sometimes maybe there is evidence which is such that your instincts and your own opinions or some ideas that are over there are in conflict with that evidence, and it may play out to another direction that you would wish it to play. But in our case, this luckily didn't happen, so the results were such that the parties that used them in their campaigns used them in a positive way, for most part at least. And then there was from Florencia the question about leaving no one behind principle and gender equality issues. Those were included in the evaluation as in one of the evaluation questions. But to be honest, 6 months for the evaluation and the very wide focus of the evaluation resulted into a situation that those specific issues, in my view, are not as well reported in the evaluation report as they could have been. And we, now with this government, my personal opinion is that we should have an idea on how to evaluate the Agenda 2030 and how to slice it into a smaller evaluations during the government, the election period, so that then we could have more focus on specific themes than what we could have at this time.
Thank you, Sami. And here we see the value of having the comparison between Finland and Nigeria, where Nigeria has already learned a bit of the experience of doing such a large-scale evaluation and dividing that down and really bringing that focus on no one left behind. And Sami, did you have anything additional there? No.
Yes, just to add from my colleague Anu, just a good reminder that of course we have the office of national evaluator, which evaluates the work of the government and different ministries. So this is what we have, and it is the direction of an independent evaluation office. I should have remembered to mention that.
Okay, great. That's so, Alex. Hopefully that responds to your question as well. So let's move to Dr. Balla in terms of response to the questions.
Yeah, okay, so I think there's only one question for me, and it has to do with the involvement of the legislature, right? So we have a bicameral legislature in Nigeria where we have the Senate and the House of Representatives. And we have standing committees both in both houses that look at the Sustainable Development Goals broadly. And so we interface and we work closely with them. But on the technical working committee of the SDG evaluation, they are not represented there. But obviously, these are processes that we can always compare notes with up till the end of an evaluation. But then also, we need to engage them in terms of the buy-in and also if you like, uptake of the key recommendations of that evaluation. So at least that is from our own part. Yeah, so that's why I'm saying, so they are represented at the steering committee level, which is the highest political committee that will provide guidance, to the entire process once we commence the evaluation proper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're hearing from both countries that embedding it within the political, the legislative, and in the institutional framework is really important, but many other learnings also. Let me turn to our discussants for this process. And this panel is a little bit unusual. Very often panels come together with people from disparate places where they haven't necessarily worked before. But actually this panel is a result of a serious piece of work that was done with the support of the 4 agencies that are supporting this process today. And it was to develop a knowledge product, which you have here, and don't leave without one, a little intermission here, evaluating sustainable development, how the 2030 agenda can help. And there was a retreat in Finland where a number of key thinkers, key evaluators, government leaders across the globe came together to say, how does this work? We have the 2030 agenda that says put evaluation into the follow-up and review processes. So the learnings that you're hearing today have actually been quite deeply deliberated, and the briefing note is one of the first knowledge products that's coming out, but there will also be a handbook which will be coming out hopefully in September, which has really been a product of the work of this team here on the panel and also others around the world who are working on this. But we have 2 of those members today to help us to think about this process. And we have González Hernández Licona, did I do all that okay? He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Oxford. He's the director of the National Council for the Evaluation of Social Development Policy, or CONEVAL. He's a board member on 3IE, which is looking at impact evaluation. He's a member of the evaluation committee of the Gavi Alliance and teaches development economics. And Stefano D'Erico from the International Institute for Environment and Development, he works with us very closely on EVALSDGs, producing the policy briefs that you see before you. He's also the lead of professionalization of evaluation at the European Evaluation Society, and an ex-council member of the United Kingdom Evaluation Society. And he's worked very deeply with monitoring and evaluation throughout his career. He wrote the monitoring, evaluation and learning strategy for Comic Relief and for IIED. And he is very heavily engaged in producing a number of knowledge products and also researching forward on that. So our 2 discussants are going to give us their brief reflections on the presentations and also from their own experience. We'll go first to Gonzalo.
Thank you very much, Dorothy, and thank you very much for the organizers. It's very exciting to be here, and always it's very exciting to hear what our friends from Finland, Nigeria are doing. We were having a coffee yesterday with Stefano, and we were saying that it was amazing. It is amazing. It is great that everybody's talking about the 2030 agenda. Everybody's talking about SDGs, not only here in New York at this very moment, but which is obviously a fact that people are talking about SDGs and the agenda, but elsewhere, countries are talking about SDGs. So you can listen that everywhere. So that's a good thing about this interesting idea. However, one thing is talking about this important idea, and a very different one is how to implement that in a country. So it's easier to talk about SDGs than to implement something coherent in a country. Because we don't have a step-by-step handbook on implementation. There's no such a thing. It will be difficult for countries to address the 169 targets at the same time. There are various coordination strategies around. And therefore, when we can listen to Nigeria and Finland in really telling us what actually happened there, is very important. Because one of the elements that should be there always in every country when they address SDGs and the agenda is, what about prioritization? How can we prioritize both the agenda and their own objectives of the country, because development in all countries didn't start with SDGs. Development started ages ago. Finland started ages ago. I mean, Finland is a very important country with various achievements, not because of the 2030 agenda, it's because of the development before. Therefore, how can Finland and Mexico and Nigeria and Italy and Cuba and the Seychelles, everyone address the agenda? That's, I think, the most important element. How are we going to prioritize? And I always like to talk about this bowling strategy. You know, when we have the bowling game, like the American bowling game, that you have to take down 10 pins with only 2 shots. You don't have 100 shots to take down the 10 pins. You only have 2 shots. So in fact, what we have in countries and governments is that we have limited resources every year from now till 2030 to tackle as many development pins as possible. So the idea is, how do you accommodate the pins? How do you accommodate the objectives with your only 2 shots every year in order to tackle all the pins, therefore in order to getting most of the targets around? So it's the art of putting the objectives according to the country and the art of doing prioritization. That's it. So I'm very happy to see what happens in Finland. They know quite clear that carbon neutrality and resource wisdom, non-discrimination, equality and high competences are 3 of the most important priorities in Finland. And they are addressing that very, very clear. And it's also very interesting what Nigeria is doing in terms of their prioritization model. It was very interesting the way you weighted the whole questions, and then you came with the 3 main targets. Those are 2 different ways in which countries are addressing the process of how are we going to implement the agenda in every country. And I'm sure, I know it will be great that in all VNRs for all countries should be clear what is the prioritization in every country. What was the idea? Because if we don't do that on reality, then we may have, means I have to stop right now, we may have either only very bureaucratic processes every year for every country. You say, you have to rush to the UN and tell them that we are very good and that everything is wonderful in Mexico, whatever. Or we won't be doing much in the future. So I want to take the last very minute just to recommend you eventually to take a look at our GDS report from that 2019. Eva is here again from my colleague. We were 15 scientists writing this report in which we have recommendations on how can we prioritize and how can we deal with interactions. 2 questions from my friends. How the guys from Nigeria are going to deal with the interactions that developing is always there. Shall we go for growth? Shall we go for climate change? We cannot do both with the way we're doing things. Thank you very much and congratulations.
Thank you, Gonzalo. And I don't think anybody now will think of the SDGs in the same way without thinking of a bowling alley and trying to get a strike. So thanks for that illustration. Over to Stefano.
Thank you, Dorothy. And I would also like to thank all our partners, UNICEF, EVALSDGs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, the Office of the Prime Minister of Finland, and also all the other partners who have, as Dorothy said, joined us during this journey. And many of them are in this panel, and like Gonzalo, others are in the room, like Martin from Chile, and some colleagues also from the UNDP Evaluation Office, UN Women. We had a long journey over the last 3 years thinking about how can we make evaluation work for the SDGs. As every journey done together with partners, you start in a way and then you end up with new ideas, and you end up discovering new avenues that eventually will help you to get there. I think one of the big issues with the SDGs is prioritization, as it has been said several times, and as we have heard also the different presentation. It is also the big elephant in the room, in a way, because nobody wants to be, and everybody's scared when we talk about the SDGs of saying we have to prioritize X rather than Y, because we can be seen as cherry picking. What are, for example, our own interests? The International Institute for Environment and Development is our institute, and it's about the interconnection between the social, economic, and environmental dimension. But of course, we can be seen as biased for the environmental goals, for example. So how do we actually tackle this issue, which is the big elephant in the room? So the prioritization process is very much a political process, as Sami and also Bala have several times stressed. Also, evaluation is a political exercise. So in that sense, we can actually use evaluation to feed into political processes in one of the most difficult challenges, which is to find exactly the right strikes to get the right pins at the national level. Of course, then the findings created with an evaluation will be part of a political dialogue within a country. We can't assume that they will straight away decide what the priorities are, but I think we do have the possibility to inform the political dialogue. So how do we do it? Because the challenge is we have 17 goals, 169 targets, 240 indicators. This is not helpful for prioritization. We have to find a way to actually understand how to do it. So some of the ideas emerge with our partners and colleagues and friends has been going back to the agenda, read the agenda again, and trying to find the principles underpinning the agenda. What are these principles? How can we actually, and what we realized was that the principles are not written anywhere, but you can hear the principles in reading the agenda. They're fairly clear. They come out clearly, but they need to be, spelled out. They need to be discussed. So in the briefing that you can find, and that Dorothy has mentioned, we have come up with a few principles together, and I would like to read them. One of them, the very first, is about integration in coherence. And we thought it was important to spell it out because it's one of the main differences, for example, with the Millennium Development Goals. The SDGs and the new Agenda 2030 acknowledges that development is complex and there are interactions between the different goals. And actually the fact that if you achieve something in one goal, you can hamper the achievement in other goals. So synergies, trade-offs, how do we make that assessment? And clearly, making one log frame times 17, it doesn't help to achieve to actually assess the integration. So how do we make that? No one left behind. What does it mean? Looking at how people living in poverty and exclusion are benefiting or they are not benefiting from policies, whether they've been included, their voice have been heard during the design of policies. Equity, how do we actually make sure that development is actually fair for everybody and everybody has got an opportunity to realize their potential. Resilience, environmental sustainability, universality. Universality is a key principle, and again, what does it mean? It's really important to have a discussion and spell it out. And what we realized is that there are different interpretations, because we can see universality as achieving the goals everywhere in every country, but it's also about how different countries are hampering the achievement of sustainable development for other countries. So what are the externalities that we should consider when we assess the national development plans of different countries, both in the north and in the south? Which countries should prioritize their policies on tackling greenhouse gases emission? Is it every country in the world that should look at that? Or actually some countries should think more carefully about it? And finally, mutual accountability. It is, we should all hold ourselves accountable to the different goals. So I think, the two experiences from Nigeria and Finland are really, really interesting. And first of all, because they are very different. They are very different countries. They are very different type of evaluation. But at the same time, they found their own way to actually come up with priorities. And clearly, Finland has identified carbon neutral economy and non-discrimination as their priorities, as much as Nigeria has identified poverty, health, well-being, and education, because they are aligned with their national development plan. And I think, what is interesting from Nigeria is that they've decided to look at those goals, which are aligned, from the perspective of Agenda 2030. In using the principle underpinning Agenda 2030, we can look at those goals and how they interact with the others. And therefore, if the government of Nigeria is going forward with, as decided as part of their internal dialogue to prioritize those, how can we make those goals in synergy, creating synergies rather than trade-offs? So all in all, it's been a very fascinating journey, and I think it's still, it's still the beginning of a journey. We have two countries here. We hope to hear, for example, from Ghana next time, and from many others that, that will do their own, will find their own way to evaluate sustainable development in their own country, and hopefully, we'll all grow together.
Yeah, so hopefully next time we will have a round table with all the countries instead of just a panel with a few countries on it. Thank you very much to Stefano and Gonzalez. We are working with the tyranny of time as always, but we have time just for a couple of questions if we have. Two over here, please, Gita. Second row and then third row. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you, UNICEF. I'm David from the Permanent Mission of Nigeria. Just like to pick up on where they stop in terms of issue of prioritization. I think Stefano somewhat indicated that maybe achieving one SDG may hamper the achievement of another SDG. But there's also another school of thought which believes that achieving one SDG can actually reinforce the achievement of other SDGs. For example, if we talk about education, through education will improve health, will reduce poverty, will increase equality, as reduce inequalities. So in a sense, really, the issue of prioritization and how the other SDGs relate to others is something we continue to reflect upon. And I believe that in terms of the GA, every year, I think the General Assembly tries to give some orientation to all the countries on what to discuss, and also to other members participating in the General Assembly discussions. And that's why I would just like to inform, for those who have not yet heard, that for the 74th General Assembly, the theme will be galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, and inclusion. And of course, the current PGA being Nigerian thought it necessary to be able to ask the international community to focus on these priorities in order to see how we as the whole international community can work together to achieve some of these aspects of the SDGs while not neglecting others. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And the lady just behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Diana Serra. I'm a consultant with the UNICEF Evaluation Office. To the point on, to Gonzalez and Stefano's point on addressing the SDGs in countries, as well as the issue of prioritization, We know that in many developing countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, with decentralization, a lot of the decision-making, the prioritization, the resource allocation is happening at the subnational level rather than the national level. And for example, when you look at Kenya, with the devolution, the county governments, the county governors have a lot of power in terms of allocating resources, and we know that more than 70% of the national budget, the budget is actually spent at the subnational level. So my question is, how can we make evaluation work at these levels? And I know the gentleman from Nigeria did mention that at the subnational level in Nigeria, there are institutional frameworks that are being developed. My question is, is there any evidence to show that these have led to any kind of policy change, or whether these have influenced decision making, and what lessons any other lessons learned, and also what can we do as a community here to be able to to make evaluation work at that level in order to accelerate the achievement of SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is a question, I think, that's coming up to the fore very much about the subnational level and how that works. We're just going to take 1 minute each to Sami and Dr. Bala to quickly respond to that as to whether you're looking at the subnational level and how, and then we'll ask Anu to finish.
Yes, thank you. Subnational level is very important. It's important in the implementation of the SDGs, even in a small country like Finland with less than 6 million people, because many of the policy areas that are relevant for the implementation of achieving the SDGs, like issues on social health and welfare or education, here the decision making is on a subnational level. So that's very important, and as a central government level officials, me and my colleagues are very often discussing how to support national level. What is the value added we can give to them in the implementation work? And then this would also be the same question for evaluation. How could we support evaluation on subnational level? But I have to admit that we are not there yet. Even in Finland, we have to work more. We have to create a closer relationship to subnational level in that respect. And there are things happening. For example, today, as we speak, Helsinki is presenting its local voluntary review here in New York. So cities are picking this up, and I think as they start to prepare local voluntary reviews, they also start to think about evaluation, and that's one way to bring this evaluation agenda also to subnational level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I've mentioned our strategic approaches at the two levels. So at the subnational level, we are working with all the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory to ensure that they integrate and mainstream the relevant SDGs into their medium and long-term development plans. We've got state governments that are now developing SDG-based plans. Last October, Kaduna, one of the 36 states, held an SDG acceleration workshop. I think the UN Deputy Secretary General was also there. And so that is what we're looking at. And when we evaluate these three of the priority SDGs, we narrowed it down to those policies that have national spread, because education is on the concurrent legislative list, which has shared responsibility between the states and the federal government. So these policies are national, and we're going down to the states because the quantitative arm of the evaluation will look at the quasi-experimental sort of design, where we look at 2 states that are doing well in terms of this education-related indicators, and two that are not doing so well. And then we could see from the quantitative side what has gone into it. So our approach has been at the national and at the subnational level. So we aim to achieve integration both at the national, which we've demonstrated with the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan 2017 to 2020. Then now is to support the subnational governments, but the task is huge. Nigeria is huge, 923,000 square kilometers and 36 states with the FCT, 774 local governments. So you can imagine the magnitude of the task. But we are facing that challenge squarely, and we will make sure that by the 2030 we leave no Nigerian behind in the overall implementation of the 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Very good. Excellent, thank you. And to give us a last word, we're going to hand over to Anu Saxon, who is currently the head of the Development Evaluation Unit for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Finland. She has held senior positions in Finland, in the European Commission, in the World Bank, and in Hungary. And she's also deputy of mission in Pretoria, South Africa, before joining the Development Evaluation Unit at the moment. Is that working okay? Yes. Over to you.
This is working, okay. Thank you, Dorothy. And dear all friends of SDGs and Agenda 2030, it's really a great pleasure for me to have a chance to give the closing remarks. And I can call this SDG evaluation family because there are already so many familiar faces from Helsinki event, and now I'm learning many new faces and learning to know them. So as a co-organization of this event, I'm happy to see that it has been interest of so many of you, and you are interested in learning the cases of Nigeria and Finland. And as discussed many times, so this is a learning event, so hopefully you get something to take back home. 17 goals, 169 targets, and 230 or plus indicators, like Stefano said, and like the Deputy Director General of UNICEF said this morning, that it's not only numbers, it's not only hard data, but it's becoming very political agenda. So we really have to consider the politicians, MPs, as very important and seriously taken stakeholders. They have really a responsibility to take this agenda forward. And it also makes this whole agenda and the evaluation as such the more complex thing. According to my understanding, there is no strong international model to how to coordinate and evaluate the Agenda 2030 with its ambitious targets. And I also have understood that there is no single country has yet introduced a credible plan how the goals of the agenda will be reached and progress evaluated. Today we have heard the cases from Finland and Nigeria. They have shown their ways how to do it. And I hope that this works as a good example for other countries also to do so, like Stefano suggested Ghana. Also, I think that this session and the cases of Nigeria and Finland, they are very timely since we are all struggling the same challenges, how to coordinate, evaluate, measure the progress of the sustainable development policies and the implementation of Agenda 30. So we have, of course, the VNRs, but as an evaluator, so they are might be a little bit biased because it's a sort of self-assessment. It's not a poor evaluation. So I hope that, like in Finland, this evaluation conducted could contribute to the VNR we are going to present next year here in Nigeria. I really thank the Sami and Dr. Yusuf for this, giving their examples. They are two completely different nations, like Stefano already said, but they are in both countries they are coordinated in very, very high level, which shows the importance of the Agenda 2030 and its implementation. So in Finland it's Prime Minister's office, and in Nigeria is an Presidency Office of Senior Specialist Assistant. So I think it's very much high level, and it's very good. And like the subnational level, so if it's coordinated at high level, so I think that it will be then going down to the subnational level as well. So I'm convinced that the experience shared with you today have been very useful and help you to plan the way forward and the next steps in your country. And I would like to thank the presenters and the presentations. They nicely completed each other, and also the discussions to complement the presentations. So once again, on the behalf of the Finnish government, I would like to take this opportunity and to thank all those organizations, UNICEF, EVAL Partners, EVALSDGs, and IIED as well, of course. And like it was said by Dorothy, so there are, as an outcome or result of the Helsinki retreat, there will be 2 knowledge products, one briefing which you already have here on display, and then there is this handbook for evaluation commissioners, hopefully coming out in September, and it's going to be launched in Prague in early October. So I really hope that these are useful products for you, and I encourage you to consult them. So great thanks for Stefano and his team for helping us in producing these products. And for all practical arrangements, I would like to thank Ada and Asela and of course Dorothy. I think we had a nice food and nice gathering this afternoon. So, and all the active participation of all of you, I really would like to thank to you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anu. And can we encourage you, as this is a learning event and there are learning materials up the back, if you'd like them electronically, please add your name to the register at the back and we can share these with you, plus these other publications when they come out. And please can we draw your attention to another learning opportunity. There's a free online learning course, Evaluation in the 2030 Agenda. So please either take one of these flyers or make sure your name's on the list and specifically ask about this. It will be starting very soon in September, and it can be done at your own speed, at your own time, wherever you are in the world. So thank you again to our panelists and to our supporters, and thank you for coming today. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you. Well done. You did very well. I think we had a good audience as well. I think so. They're really engaged. Thank you very much.